Each episode, we bring you B2B leaders to learn about their successes, fails, and what's working for them in the market. If you enjoy the show, please consider giving us a 5-star rating on Apple and Spotify and share this podcast with a friend. That's enough from me. Let's dive right in.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode. I'm Shahin with X Growth, and today I'm talking to Soumyajit Dey Global Head for Digital Experience Optimization at Thoughtworks about how marketing leaders can eliminate regional silos and have the whole organization across multiple geographies on the same page and pretty much have no issue with silos. On that note, let's dive in. Soumyajit, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Shahin. Thanks for this opportunity.
No, absolute pleasure. I mean, I'm super excited to talk about this because I think organizations, when they get bigger, pretty much the moment they introduce a new geography, they start to experience and go through silos where one department or one marketing team in APAC doesn't really know what's happening with EMEA, and they start to implement certain things in certain locations, and the department within itself starts to drift apart. Whether EMEA is doing one thing, North America is doing something, APAC is doing another thing, and even within regions in APAC, Singapore is doing something, and ANZ is doing something else. So I think it's a really important component. And I want to gauge what do you think are the main reasons organizations end up with regional silos?
Sure, Shahin, that's a great question. And what you mentioned is so true. And we see that everywhere, in all the geographies at all point in time, right? So in my mind, there are a few reasons why this happens. And I'll just kind of probably talk through a little bit more. So one is I can think of is a short-term goal versus a long-term vision. And typically the regional teams, they tend to navigate towards the short-term business goals and tactical execution to generate the demand for the business. So their requirement of generating demand, meeting the business goals, leads them to sometimes adopt certain ways and practices which might be not longer term vision, but keeping the shorter term in mind, like the quick execution part of it. Then the market dynamics in each region also varies, and that is understandable. How an APAC works versus how probably a North America works may be very different, and the local nuances in this market makes the regional teams deviate from a standardized approaches or process a lot of times. So for example, if an organization is coming up with some sort of guidelines, the regional teams may feel the pinch because it might not be relevant for their regional markets the way they wanted the business to run, right? Data and technology silos also are another reasons for regional silos to happen, because oftentimes the way data, technology, and processes are managed, there is a lack of standardized approach. This leads to the regional teams coming up with steps and processes that don't really align to the organization as a whole. Cultural differences at times also are reasons why regional teams ends up in silos. So these are few of the reasons which typically the regional marketeers they face, or the regional teams they face in coming up with most of the silos, is what I have observed personally working across different organizations and across different teams as well. So I just thought I'd share that with you.
Yeah, got it. I mean, I completely get those 4 points, and they're very clear. I mean, the data component is a very great example. I know everyone talks about data and everyone's like, oh, data is really important, but really there's a really hard challenge where certain providers are not available in APAC, for example. I mean, we experience this all the time. There are data providers that the data that they provide is the source of certain things that you do in your marketing activity, and that data just is not there for for example, Singapore or Malaysia or some of those other regions. Now, I know at Thoughtworks, one of the things that you and the team have done is to set up a center of excellence in order to combat this, and one of the initiatives is to combat this. How does a center of excellence play into all of this? How does that work?
Sure. See, the center of excellence obviously has a very key role, or rather roles to play in this overall scheme of things. So Few of them are like, for example, standardization and streamlining of processes and operations, right? A COE typically brings in the efficiency of having specialized resources who are able to deliver with excellence and scale. And that's the larger intent of having a COE. So at Thoughtworks, we have developed a COE in a model, in a way where we have the specialized resources, the teams, and the capabilities to deliver with scale and excellence. For example, in a marketing world like us, we play a critical role in defining the best practices, outlining the strategy, creating frameworks, and most importantly, operationalize it by executing the campaigns, keeping these frameworks in mind. So at ThoughtWorks, this is the principle we have adopted, and this has started to help the regional teams plug and play to their strengths, following the framework and yet keep the local flavors intact. So a COE plays the role of a consultant and advisor, and it comes up with standardization and processes that relates to the marketing execution, and this overall helps to streamline the way marketing is done. So that's the approach we have taken in ThoughtWorks.
Interesting. Interesting. You mentioned skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to get into understanding how far does the input of the center of excellence go, and where does it stop for different regions. But before getting in there, I'd love to kind of unpack the COE that you mentioned. And you said, there are certain skills that need to be there.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the skills that are really crucial for having a really effective COE?
So I would say digital operations, your overall automation or marketing technology, that is MarTech strategy, your digital analytics, and also your campaign excellence. So the objective is to have a user experience in mind as the first principle. Like, how do we talk to the users? How do we communicate to the users? And what does the user experience when they interact with us? So if this is the end goal, then you step backwards and work towards having a digital operations team which specializes in MarTech, which specializes in CRM, which specializes in tools and platforms. Then you have the digital analytics team, which specializes in analytics, reporting, and insights. Then you have the CMS team, which helps in terms of the coming up with the overall strategy for the web experience for the users. And of course, you have the digital campaign excellence team, which typically focuses on extending the digital experience to the users and the end users per se, when they start interacting with our advertising, when they start interacting with our platforms, etc. So these are the different skill sets that is important for a COE to have, and we at ThoughtWorks, we have them.
Got it. So tell me if I got that right. So there's a marketing ops component that is really important, the operational piece of having that talent there. I got there's a digital piece, so the advertising component, everything that goes in there. And the last piece that I have is campaign design and campaign. I think you call it campaign excellence, which I like that. I like that phrase. Those are the three areas.
And also the CMS, Shahin. The CMS typically is the content management system, which is primarily our website experience. So because every endpoint or in a campaign or in an experience, I think CMS plays a very important role, because that is where users would come and engage and read more content about ThoughtWorks, right? So the CMS team is also a very critical component of the COE, because that brings to life the actual interaction or where the content is hosted or how the users kind of engage. So that's the web, right? So we treat the web, thoughtworks.com, as, let's say, for lack of any other, better word, we might call it the temple or the Bible, right? Where users would come and engage with the different content. So that's an important component as well.
What are some of the challenges that you faced putting this team together?
I think when we started this journey, a couple of years back, it was all very new. The teams were trying to adjust, the teams were trying to find their feet in terms of the new way of working in the marketing. So a lot of challenges are around coaching and enabling the teams. making sure that the processes and documentations are in place, and every time we come up with some initiative or some new ways of working, we ensure that like we need to have a documentation which is easily accessible, which is snackable and easy for the teams to understand. There, as you know, with any change management, there is always the initial niggles that the teams would have, and so was with us as well. There were questions around the logic of approaching this. There were questions around how do we execute. There were questions around the benefits and the pros and cons. But then we, through the process of consultative coaching, enabling the regional teams, ensuring that we had proper documentations in place, etc., we kind of overcome these challenges.
Got it. Soumyajit, where do you draw the line? Where do you stop? Because I would imagine that you get a lot of pushback from your regional team where they're like, I mean, these are some of the phrases or things that I've heard. I'm not saying it's necessarily from Thoughtworks, but from other organizations where the regional team is like, oh my God, HQ doesn't get us. Like, they don't understand what's going on here. And then I have to adhere to these things and, yada, yada, yada. The challenge or the complaint in a lot of situations is that, I've given this template, I don't have room to play, and I just don't think it's going to work for my market. Has that been a challenge that maybe in the early days you and the team faced? Where do you kind of draw that line to give flexibility to the regional team and rigidity from, or not rigidity, but structure from the Center of Excellence?
Now, that's a great question, Shahin, and I totally relate to the pain points of the regional teams from various organizations, because it's true. The center of the work or the job of the Center of Excellence is not only to create a template and a process and a guideline and then roll it out. The important aspect is how do you really and truly partner with the regional teams, right? And I think that is the essence which a lot of the folks in the Center of Excellence teams in various organizations they miss. They think that the role of a Center of Excellence is primarily to create templates, primarily to create guidelines, and then leave it to the regional teams to adopt. But it doesn't work that way. I think at Thoughtworks, the approach we took is a very collaborative approach, and that also goes a long way because of the culture of Thoughtworks overall. I mean, even before Center of Excellence or marketing, I think in general, Thoughtworks as an organization, collaboration and pairing is considered to be something which is really, really critical to our culture overall as an organization. So that also probably helped us to execute this much better than probably many other organizations would have done. What we do is, once we come up with a framework, once we have that in place, we ensure we get every stakeholder buy-in at the very beginning itself. So our frameworks are designed not necessarily based only on the inputs from the COE team, but we also take in the inputs from the regional teams, participate in a workshop, participate in discussions, and then come up with a framework. And once the framework is ready, how do we typically distribute that? So we have our various communications tool through which we kind of distribute this. We have our different coaching sessions, we have our different mentoring sessions, we have our different training sessions through which we kind of enable. And a lot of us in the role, we typically work very closely with the regional leaderships and have a cadence where we go over this week on week or month on month or bi-weekly, however the cadence is, right? So at every step, we try to ensure that we are looking at catering to the regional needs, giving the regional requirements and importance, and then trying to bake that into the larger global always on kind of campaigns, right? While I know we still have a long way to go, the journey has kind of begun. While we are seeing a lot of success with a lot of the regions working hand in hand with all of us, but of course there are certain regions where the nuances are even more critical to understand, and we are in that journey of understanding, and I'm sure we'll kind of get there. But in principle, these are few of the things that we do where we ensure that at the beginning we involve all the stakeholders, get their buy-ins, have a collective discussion to come up with the framework. Once we roll out the framework, we ensure we have the regular cadences to ensure that whenever a campaign is planned or any digital or any marketing communications is planned, we are involved at the very beginning in the discussion, so that there is a collaboration that happens from the very beginning and we don't come in towards the later. So in that case, that allows us to help us to advise the teams much earlier in the journey. So this seems to be working well. Of course, as we learn more, as we scale more, we'll obviously bring in more best practices, and this will evolve.
Out of the four areas that you talked about, we talked about CMS, we talked about ops, digital, and campaign excellence. Are there certain areas that you feel there is a need for further buy-in, for further communication? It requires a lot more collaboration with the regional team than some of the other ones?
Yeah, so I think analytics and insights is one of them, because it all boils down to data and how we manage data, how we interpret data, and how we ultimately start drawing that insights which has a business impact. So I think that is one area which definitely needs a lot of more collaboration, a lot of more working hand in hand in terms of understanding, what's happening with the data, what are we doing, what are we looking at, and how do we want to scale up in the future. So that's one area I would say we need much more collaboration than what we do right now.
Got it. Okay. You talked about there are certain regions that you've experienced that there is more work required for that region than some of the other ones. And, that doesn't necessarily reflect on a person in the team, but it's more likely the geography. Things are very different. How business is done in Japan versus Australia versus India versus, Middle East. What are some of the regions that you see it needs more attention, and there is further customization for that region? Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, sure. See, Thoughtworks, we are present in multiple geographies, and which is English and non-English speaking geographies included, right? So I see a lot of potential specifically for the non-English speaking geographies. For example, the LATAM countries like Brazil, or even Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, your Thailand, etc. Right? Also, in the European Union, there are local regional teams, that is Italy, Spain, Germany. They all have the Netherlands. They all have the regional nuances, which is very much specific to the geography. So I see there is a lot of scope and potential where we can collaborate more with these regional teams, especially for example, when we have some content rolled out, it is by default English first, which is understandable, but then how do we ensure that the translated versions are part of the plan from day one itself, so that the campaigns are rolled out in a truly global way? So how do we operationalize that? How do we ensure that the planning is done at the very beginning itself, where the translation is baked in from day one itself, right? Is one example I can think of, right? So also in terms of the partners, the local media partners, what might work probably for an United States or an India or an Australia might be very different in Netherlands, because the local media is very different. So from an advertising point of view, how do we ensure we work closely with the local media relations team, the local business team, understand what are those media which is an important in that region, and then how do we bake that into our overall plan? Same goes with Brazil and other LATAM countries, because the nuances are very different. The languages spoken are very different. The way the business conducted is very different. And of course, the user behavior is very different, which is very important. So how do we improve that? How do we collaborate more? How do we evolve that into the next level of marketing? It's something where I see definitely there is a more scope of collaboration with these regions.
Got it. The whole concept of center of excellence is very clearly something that you and the team have been working on at Thoughtworks for a while, and it's not something that you've recently rolled out. It's been in the makings for multiple years. If you and it's very clear that you're looking at that as a solution to reduce those silos in regional marketing and bringing everyone on the same page. If you were to go back a couple of years, how would you do differently? How would you approach things differently? Would there be something that you would do differently to kind of start things and kick things off?
Yeah, absolutely. I would probably ensure that more regional participation is present while we are coming up with the entire approaches or processes. While we do that right now, it's not that we don't do it, but I think that could be done better. Then ensuring that more collaboration happens, and probably like workshops, that's probably a face to face. And I know that last couple of years, because of the pandemic, we may not have had the time to collaborate the way we would have ideally liked to, because earlier, like, and even before I joined the Thoughtworks team, I knew that like teams would meet often, they would be having workshops, they would be coming together, and that's how the collaborative model at Thoughtworks is to work. So I think pandemic had some disruptions, but again, having said that, it's not something that no, we cannot address in the future, and as things open up. So I would suggest that like maybe we try to bring in the teams much earlier in the discussion, have more workshops in place, get help from external analysts such as foresters and gardeners of the world to probably participate with us in that entire framework building exercises. Think of a longer term plan versus like an annual plan. Maybe at least have a vision for the next 2 3 years or 4 years of this is how marketing is going to evolve, and then break it down into like annual or biannual execution and priorities, right? So again, we are doing all these things, but I can say that we can do this much better. We can make it much more cohesive, right? So these are a few of the things I can think of how we can collaborate better, or I would do differently.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Now, I want to talk about budgeting, right? And how you approach budgeting for different regions, because, the Center of Excellence for Campaigns is going to design some certain templates and certain ways of doing things, right? And maybe not every region will get the same budget. I'm sure the budget for, Malaysia might be less than Australia and New Zealand, just because of the sheer potential business that could be generated from there. Obviously, it's purely looking at the size of the market. How do you approach regional budgeting so that you don't bump into those challenges?
So we provide a lot of autonomy to the regional teams in terms of when it comes to the budget, because we strongly believe that the regional nuances or the regional requirements for the business is very critical, and no better than the regional teams to probably highlight that and work collaboratively with the central team. So that's a flexibility and autonomy that the regional teams have. Having said that, the COE also looks at budgeting at a central level in collaboration, of course, with the regional teams. The primary reason for that is because if you have a centralized budget, it helps in determining the appropriate media buy at economies of scale, right? For example, you talked about Malaysia, like while Malaysia might have a lower pie of budget, but if you have a visibility towards the business plan, if you have a visibility towards the goals and what we would want to achieve as a business in Malaysia, and how can you support from the central team, if you have that early visibility from the local team, then even from the central media buying, you can allocate certain proportion, which is much at an economies of scale, because when you do that media buying at a central level, it becomes much more easy. That's one. Secondly, we at Thoughtworks, we collaborate very closely with the regional teams in understanding what could be the local media requirement. Yes, there could be a certain region which has less budget, obviously because of the business regions, but even within that budget, is there a possibility that business tops up the central budget to some extent by X percentage? Or is it that the local budget is going to be utilized primarily on the local channels for the region, versus the global budget or the central budget is used for more of the global platforms which has a presence in those markets? So these are the various permutation combinations, and we weigh in these factors before we kind of consider what kind of budget we typically goes in. But in short, the combination is we have a central pool of budget which is allocated in a certain percentage wise based on the business impact for those regions. Then we work very closely with the regional teams to ensure there's a top-up budget of that region so that the global and region are aligned, and then there is a X amount of budget and a sizable budget that goes for your advertising in those markets. That's typically how we break it up.
Got it. And it also takes input from the business case that the regional teams put forward, and there's a bit of flexibility from that side as well.
Yeah,
got it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And this is very true for regions that are that function in very different way than probably the few of the top economies that we have, right? For example, the way the media would operate in a Brazil is very different from the way the media would operate in a US or a UK, right? So then it's important to understand that even if there are global players present in those markets, how much of an impact will they have on the local business? What is that an amount in terms of the dollars or the conversion, which helps us to get that media going? And these are discussions you have with the regional stakeholders, the heads of marketing, the business, and try and understand where you can make the maximum impact and smartly collaborate. I think that's the key.
Got it. Okay. Before we go into rapid fire questions, I got one other thing that I want to cover with you, and that's around your advice for organizations and marketing leaders who are like, okay, cool, I get the point of center of excellence, right? And I want to set one up for our organization. Now, from everything that we talked about and my own personal experience as well, it is not a small task to do this. What's your advice for somebody who's like, a marketing leader who's like, okay, we're going to set up a center of excellence. Where should they start? What should they think about at the beginning so that they don't get overwhelmed by the scale of work that's going to go into this?
Yeah, sure. So I think in my mind, and I can just talk about my own experience or what I think, having seen in the Center of Excellences in few of the organizations I have worked. I think as a marketing leader, if you want to set up a Center of Excellence, the first thing you should keep in mind is what are the overall organization goals, and how does the regional teams or the various geographies tie into those goals. I think understanding that as a starting point is important. And then even before you think of doing XYZ, of setting up a center of excellence by doing A, B, C, setting up certain teams, etc., try and understand from the regional teams what is their requirement, what is that will benefit them if a center of excellence is actually set up, what are those actual requirements. If you get a requirement analysis done and then work backwards to set up a center of excellence team, I think that is a good start. I have seen in a lot of organizations, and not Thoughtworks, but few of the other organizations I have worked in the past, where the marketing leaders, when they were planning of setting up a center of excellence team, they went ahead a lot with the theoretical aspect of why a COE team should be existing, but not looking into the practical realities of setting these operations up, or how does that impact. So when I say theory, I mean, oh yes, I need to set up a center of excellence team because it does XYZ, and that helps to scale. But how do you typically operationalize that? How do you get it in the market? How do you put it in practice? I think that's important. So as a marketing leader, is while having a strategy is important, but one should also have a very clear understanding on how you would take that into the market. What could be the possibilities if you are working with 5 different teams? What are their requirements? How do you address them? What kind of business scale would you look at? And all these factors evaluated together is where you decide how you would want to set up a center of excellence team. And of course, goes without saying, the right kind of the head count, the right kind of capability building, right kind of streamlining and alignment. So building those individual streams of work which will help to actually ease out the pain. I think these are things which will anyways come in by default. But in my mind, one of the most important critical aspects would be to understand the requirements from the regions and then mapping it back to the larger center of excellence, because then you have a head start.
Got it. I love it. Let's do some rapid fire questions. So the first thing I want to ask you is, Soumyajit, what is one resource that has fundamentally changed the way you work or you live? And this could be a book, it could be a podcast, it could be a blog, it could be a conversation you've had, an advice that you got from someone. But what comes to mind?
Honestly, I'm not into big time book reading. However, I do read articles on business, economics, and current affairs because that's one of my passion. And I also watch various television shows that talks about business. I'm an avid listener of the CNN podcasts on topics related to business, technology, etc. And in general, I have a very open mind in terms of whatever I come across as something really interesting, be it if I am browsing my social, or be it browsing some sort of a content, or listening to some sort of a shows or in television. I'm kind of open, so I don't have anything very specific as such which really fundamentally change the way you I kind of work or live. But I would say it's a combination. But having said that, I must say that when I was growing up, there were two major influences I had in my life, and because of which I took up studying economics. And one was our finance minister in India at that point in time in 1991, Mr. Manmohan Singh, who is an economist himself, and he ensured that we get into the economic liberalization in terms of the open economy. So that really inspired me to think the big picture, as a student. And then I studied economics. I loved the subject. I came into marketing completely by default. I had no plans of marketing, but I kind of came into it. But that kind of gave me a good insight, and made me think that how should one think big, how should one think of economies of scale, etc. I think those concepts came in at an early stage, in which I started to apply more in my life as I kind of grew, and I'm growing, right? So yeah, so if you ask me, that could be one major impact. But in general, nothing very specific. I am kind of quite a bit listening to various podcasts or reading, etc.
I love it. If you could give one advice to B2B marketers, what would it be?
I would say focus on building your brand. The demand will follow. Oftentimes we as marketers and salespeople, we tend to focus on demand-driven marketing, which by the way is very important. I do not deny that, because that ultimately helps to build the pipeline. But we forget to ask the questions as to why should a client consider us over others in the market? What is the value proposition we bring in as an organization, as a brand overall, right? So I think brand marketing in a B2B is very important. Not only in B2B, I think in marketing it is overall very important, but more so in B2B, because B2B is something which is a long-term proposition. It's not like an e-commerce, you go buy, swipe the credit card and walk on. So I think B2B is all about relationship building. B2B is about a lot of thought leadership. B2B is about really making a change for the society. So a lot of aspects go into B2B marketing, and especially technology B2B marketing, with all the technology evolving and emerging tech that's coming through. The world's changing, right? So I think building a brand as an organization is very, very critical. And a lot of times marketers, we forget in the rush to do demand gen marketing. So my strong piece of advice would be while demand gen is important and it will follow, but build the brand, the rest will follow.
Love it. Question number 3, who are some of the influencers that you follow in the space?
The influencers that I follow need not be in the marketing and sales space, but however, they definitely have a lot of influence in general, how marketing and sales is done overall. And I'll probably give a few names, right? And then probably you'll be able to relate. To start with, Laszlo Block, former CHRO of Google, right? The way he set up the entire organization in keeping the people first in mind, in my mind, is nothing but a great example of how an operations is done, or how things are carried out. So in marketing, if you borrow those best practices, you can definitely improve the way you operate in marketing. So Laszlo Block is somebody whom I follow. Our own Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, right? I think he has not had any formal education in marketing, but the way he manages the country of billions of, the strength of billions of people, the way he is a visionary, the way he wants to ensure that the communication is there in front of the audiences at the right point in time is, in my mind, one of the best examples of marketing I can think of. Everything that we have seen how our country has grown in the leadership is something which I feel is a very good example of marketing, right? So that's another. Mike Bloomberg, and we are all extremely familiar with who he is. So the way he's built this empire, the visionary or the predictions or the analysis which he has over the years shared with us and how we have all benefited, I think that's a great inspiration story. And not was in the least, since I'm a big fan of sports and I love cricket, I think one of my ideal is Saurav Ganguly, who is the president of Cricket Board of India currently. So he's an inspiration in terms of how you organize, how you arrange the one of the biggest tournaments even during the pandemic, which is the IPL, the Indian Premier League. And how do you typically ensure that you have the advertising, you have the business going, you have the different operational aspects, etc. So as a leadership, as a as a person who is leading these, it's an inspiration for me, right? So I kind of really follow certain nuances of, or certain examples of how he leads the team, or how he has done it in the past and is doing it right now, right? So yeah, so these are a few of the examples, as I said, not related to marketing skills at all, but they definitely have a strong influence and go a long way in making you think something different, making you think out of the box in most of the cases, and lead by example.
I love it. I think those are awesome examples. And you said that like some of the best learnings come from outside of the industry. Last question I want to ask you is, what is something that excites you about B2B today?
Yeah, about today specifically, I would say the focus on customer experience is really at its high. I think we all talk about customer experience. We talk about the user journey, ensuring that there's a long increasing customer lifetime value that is created. I think this is the biggest discussion or the vibe that you get when you talk about B2B today, and it has evolved along in the past few decades, right? So yeah, I love the way multiple B2B exchanges or marketplaces that has come up, that provides opportunities to automate, collaborate, and minimize and your business costs, etc. And this is all based on the focus on customer experience and ensuring that there is the experience is given the priority versus anything else that typically B2B traditional B2B used to be maybe a couple of decades back. So yeah, so customer experience is something which is really exciting about B2B today.
Soumyajit, this has been an awesome conversation, and something that I think a lot of our listeners are going to take a lot away from. So I just want to say thank you again for jumping on and sharing all your insights and all the golden nuggets that you have shared. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shahin. I think it was a pleasure talking with you, and thank you for providing me this opportunity to go through these different points and have a discussion. And I thoroughly enjoyed the questions and the candid conversations we had. And I think it's really important when we are having conversations, one is able to be candid enough to have these discussions. And I'm sure I'm looking forward to probably having more interactions with you in the future. And yeah, thank you so much for having me here and inviting me to this.
Absolutely, pleasure's all mine, and definitely looking forward to it.
Thank you, Shahin. Thank you so much.
This episode of Growth Colony was produced by Alexander Hipwell. It was edited by Dave Samito, with additional editing and music arrangement also by Alexander Hipwell. Special thanks to Tina Wabe and Rod Hoda. We couldn't make this show without you. The show is hosted by Shahin Hoda. If you enjoyed the episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. And maybe even share the pod with a friend if you loved it that much. Thanks again for all the support, and looking forward to seeing you again in the next one.